Sleepless with Charley.
Hello, and welcome all, guys, gals, non-binary pals, back to another episode of Sleepless with Charley, an ASMR-style podcast where I reach into the darkest, creepiest, spookiest corners of the internet, mostly Reddit, and read soft-spoken renditions of your favorite horror stories to help you sleep. I hope you guys all had a fantastic week this week. I know I've had a wonderful week. If you're on YouTube, you can see my little gaming chair that I found on the side of the road. Just cleaned it up, obviously. Changed a wheel, and it's as good as new. So, trash people unite. Like, comment, leave a 5-star review if you are also a little trash person that just pillages your neighbor's trash at every chance. Anyway, I hope you've all had an equally fantastic week and you are looking forward to Godzilla Part 2. Will there be a Part 3? I don't know yet. We'll have to see how long these chapters are, because last time, the first chapter, I was feeling pretty good. And then once I got to chapter 2, 3, it started realizing, okay, these are getting longer and longer. So we'll have to see how we do, and there may be a Part 3. I'll indicate in the description so you don't need to watch all the way to find out. Speaking of YouTube also, this is going to be the first episode posted on the podcast channel. So hello, welcome if you're coming on YouTube, and welcome back if you're on any other podcast platform. Hi, it's great to see you all, or hear you all. Listen, you're listening to me. It's one-sided. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into the next part of Godzilla NES. I was on Chapter 5, Part 1. In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but it was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful, and then it gets rather, I guess I would call it distorted? It made me feel depressed and unnerved. Not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Mechagodzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from Face. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional, because after the first 2 questions at the start, the quiz started to take on a darker tone. Quiz 3. Number 1. Do you like ice cream? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 1. Number 2. Do you like clowns? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 10. Number 3. Is time slipping through your fingers? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 2. And number 4. Do you have any regrets? Answer, yes. Reaction, hurt. Number 5. Do some people deserve to die? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 3. Number 6. Is it safe to go out at night? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 5. Number 7. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 9. Number 8. Have you ever killed anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 7. Number 9. Do you want to kill anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, angry. Number 10. Are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 4. Number 11. Does life have any real meaning? Answer, no. Reaction, love. Number 12. Do you like Mothra? Answer, no. Reaction, maniacal. I knew that the last one was going to be a gameplay-related question, but I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly because, as I said before, I never liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in this game, and there was a good reason for that. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed back to the left corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles in some levels. So I answered no, and Face actually replied back to me, not only with the maniacal expression, but the text. Too bad. I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed, but there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet, even if I had said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyways. Face giveth, face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice, for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this level that just seemed off to me, even more than the previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch-black background. I've always been afraid of being in a forest at night. Something about all those trees, it makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable. And the fact that I was stuck as Mothra didn't help. Playing the game's previous worlds as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery, being in control of the King of Monsters. I'd be able to handle just about anything in my way. But it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug, traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments, sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow, rhythmic drums and chiming bells. It gave me this feeling that I was intruding into some dangerous place where I really should not be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage. Or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were strange, long-legged deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they would just idly walk around. I went to approach them, and they ran off. I thought about shooting one with an I-beam to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of the deer-like animals, and also 2 new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing on a tree, and a hairy, raptor-esque beast that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather that I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help the deer creatures escape. I got clawed at, but confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top of the screen. After that, I had to choose whether I wanted to play the levels with the hourglass or the TV screen. I picked the latter. What I got was not at all what I expected. And then there's a gif of a little beaver child licking a lollipop. Lovely, we love it. When I pressed the button to start a level on the TV screen like I normally would, the screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be playing on the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this because it was so strange. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked just like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect from the rest of these icons. I went to try an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was certainly an unorthodox-looking level, all brown with time-measuring instruments floating in the air and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen. And very early in the level, I encountered something else I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. And not just that, it seemed to be a whole fleet of them, and the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of these. Number 1, a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the level with enemies from the past. Number 2, a red hourglass that made time speed up and filled the level of enemies from the future. And number 3, a green hourglass that set time to normal speed and filled the level with the original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game started to slow down, and I saw the enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all of these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment, and I encountered the green hourglass, and then I fought the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots. But in the last segment, I encountered the red hourglass, and the enemies that must have been from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that will actually exist thousands of years into Earth's future, I have no idea. But with that thought in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie, and it made me more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once, called Trudon Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the 5th type of future creature, and when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but its sprite didn't actually move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose it could be considered mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored the health and energy I had lost fighting it, which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world of Mothra alone. After that previous stage I call Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of an ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it made me feel like I had sniffed some toxic fumes myself, and it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while playing this level. The enemies all seemed to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the waist to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try and make it stop, but then this flock of skullbirds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I felt bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health quick from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onward. Of all the levels in Entropy, this was probably the most normal in that there were little deviants from the move forward smash things formula in the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level, like tentacled blobs, and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept on flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with the occasional flock of birds now and then. At the end of the level was a large, bluish-green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss. Some kind of monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacks with a mouth projectile, and by charging into you. It also could go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. I let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest level icon I hadn't seen yet, which was the White Tree. As I guessed, the level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. But, unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song that sounded almost romantic. It was quite stress-relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous, covered in snow. I traveled through the first segment, enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when suddenly I realized something. I hadn't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where were all the animals? Soon after, I left the screen, and the next segment started. In the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, but then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game, and this was likely another one of those. But then, I heard something familiar. It was the 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. I could feel my heart sink as I came across this horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have all frozen to death. On closer inspection, some were missing body parts. Now, I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state. And sure enough, I did. It was a creature much like the beaked sloth, except this thing had white fur, and it was more of a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to at least see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for very long. A pack of raptors, who must have sensed that something else was still alive, came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The beaked gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different than their temperate relatives. While the other raptors only attacked through hunting prey or when provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have all gone insane. They attacked everything on sight. One of them was running back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left this second segment, I even saw 2 raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen. But in this segment, I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty, grassy plain, with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned, and immediately I started to feel dread. This is going to sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. This game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake. And then the moon moved down from the sky, and it began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled-up humanoid figure fell into the lake, as the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, and then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus I was introduced to a monster that I'll call the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took, as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight. And it was the most difficult fight yet. Stronger than any of the previous bosses, this creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Mothra it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gigan's Saw, because if it had, I never would have won this. I barely had 3 bars of health left when I finally killed this abomination. But what happened afterward is hardly what I would call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I have to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but the game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts, because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expressions she had before. She would speak very clearly, without any hint of emotion. When it was finally over, she would start trembling, and sometimes bury her face in her hands, and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me into words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran right into traffic. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know the game knows about this because after I defeated the moon beast, this happened. Then there's a screenshot, all black, except for red letters in the middle that say, Melissa, and then, kill yourself. And then, printed all over the screen, it says, kill, 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 kill. And then, it's closer together and it says, kill, 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 kill. And then, a picture with the face of the beast in the thumbnail. So creepy. Oh my goodness. Still gives me chills. Anyway, that leads us into Chapter 5, Part 2. After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could do to not burst out screaming, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea it would go so far, or that it was even capable of doing what it just did. I could feel my brain going haywire as I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? That didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what now seemed obvious. The game is alive. And not only that, it can also establish some kind of mental connection with the player. And yet, I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was the game messing with my mind or just my stubborn curiosity, but even with the previous revelation, I really wanted to see this through to the end, even more than I did before I beat dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew that if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I tried to restart the game, it might go back to being normal again. How many people ever get to witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take screenshots of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn the TV off in case I felt I was in actual danger. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug out of the wall, or just run out of the room. Surely that would be enough. Whatever powers the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I still didn't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for a few minutes to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. And speaking of TVs, there was a TV screen icon right below the white forest I had just left. And because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try it another time to see what happened. Although I expected the same animation, I got a totally different one. It's a weird little lizard, fish man. Just... I kind of love him. I want him as my phone background. Weird. The music for this one was the Neptune board music. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fish man and all. I can't help but wonder what the point of these things are. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have been a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left Entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the closest thing, so I went to that, and I started up in a gold labyrinth level. My health and power were refilled. I'm not sure how or why, but I was glad not to be heading into the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that my Mothra sprite had shrunk to half of its original size. The music was a slow, ominous drum beat, with female vocals kicking in about a minute into it. Quite haunting. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played out if I was using Godzilla or Anguirus, because flying seemed necessary just to get around this place. Another thing that caught my attention was that when you go left, the monster actually turns and faces the left. That sounds obviously stupid, but in the original game, you were only supposed to move to the right, so when you tried to move left, your monster ended up walking or flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size, because every time I thought I had reached an end to it, or I thought I was going back where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. And I found one statue face at a dead end with a wide, open-eyed stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this the whole time. And when she got hit by the truck, she still had that same expression. I can't help but feel like something really is staring at me from behind the screen when I look at this. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever in all directions. I must have wandered around the level for at least 15 minutes before I finally saw something. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly the only one of its kind in this level. Lacking any kind of hover ability like the other creatures, it just walked back and forth on the platform. But it wasn't soon after that I found a flying machine swoop down and grabbed it, and then flew off with the creature. The machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow it to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over to the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature emerged from a hole in the cauldron's side, now adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but I'm glad I came upon it, because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the board, I realized that the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made planning my route through Entropy easier. There were still 2 new sign icons to explore, the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black labyrinth icons, which were surrounded by bosses, I played the Indigo Cliffs first. It was a lot like the Blue and Green Mountains. The level's graphics had the same shredded look to it. There's also a recolor of the clouds and moon from the toxic waste dump. The music, if you can call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big heads emerging from a small cave in the background. They all made a synchronized shaking sound, and they walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, I followed them on their route. More and more emerged from the cave, until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually, the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked to see that upon reaching the cliff, all of the creatures began jumping into the abyss. I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. Very unsettling way to start off a level. I continued on, flying over various strange animals like the one shown here. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was jumping up and down, only to be snatched up by large birds, which I'm fairly certain are sprite versions of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. Sea Monster. I defeated some of the gondors in battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seemed so eager to die. If the game itself is alive, perhaps the creatures in these levels are also alive? And some have very unhappy lives, if this behavior is any indication. But what provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspect that the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of bobbleheads marching up to a large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me. So acting on impulse, I fired off both eye beams at the monster, and the bobbleheads. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry. and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any ranged attacks, it was relentless. But it was no match for me. I was in the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon. After that, I would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth before fighting Mechagodzilla. And lastly, going through the chase with the Hell Beast. I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first, time to beat up Batra. As I expected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varen's battle theme. Whenever the game puts in a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, the other form always shows up. For a game that's otherwise inexplicable, it's rather startling in its consistency and its accuracy with the new kaiju bosses. The fight started off simple. Larva Batra fought in a similar fashion as Maguma did, charging back and forth and occasionally firing off lightning from its horn. During the fight, I noticed that Mothra's combat capabilities had been altered in my favor. Number 1. The I-beams did twice as much damage as they did originally. Now they were as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did this nice thing where it would actually hit the enemy when you used it. Number 2. In the original game, even though Mothra could fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You would get knocked back in the same way as you just ran straight into them, which was extremely annoying. But not anymore. I could change direction and fly around, which was a big help because fighting Imago Batra was much like fighting a clone Mothra, although Batra is distinctly faster and stronger. No longer impeded by its slow-moving larva form, Imago Batra was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the horn lightning, it now had a new, more powerful I-beam. Batra could change direction just like I could, so this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damned fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like. But first, I went through an Indigo Cliffs level and shot through a lot of the creatures for health power-ups. So, about Megalon. His music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one, and so far, only, film appearance. He was a lot like Moguera, but faster and with more weapons. He'd start out charging off with his drills. I liked to fly back and forth around him, which seemed to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back, turn around, and start spitting out grenades. Those were a pain, because they bounce when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under it and then shoot him with I-beams. Overall, I'd describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. I was now nearing the end of Entropy. I had just taken down Megalon, and I started up the last TV screen to see what I'd get this time. The result was unpleasant. In this animation is what looks like a woman laying down, strapped to a table, and a buff, mostly naked man in an executioner's mask, chopping her noggin. So, pretty gruely. Gruely. Gnarly, grueling. I combined the two words. Look at that. Making up new words. The music for this gruesome scene was a password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent in comparison to the other two. The whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went on to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe, like I had suddenly become tired when I wasn't before. Most likely, it was just the tension from all that had happened in this game getting to me, but who knows? The last level on Entropy is what I like to call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambiance, similar to the unforgiving Cold Loop, but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about a minute, and I noticed there weren't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then this might be a good thing. Maybe there wouldn't be any obstacles and I could get through the level with ease. Then the screen went dark. Immediately, I snapped out of my daze from a few seconds earlier. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was a Mothra sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going, and I ended up frantically running into the walls. I heard a noise, the sound of a crowd running through a hallway. And along with the running came the roars, loud roaring sounds, which I would describe as something like a rabid dog the size of an elephant, screaming with fury. And I could tell that whatever was making this noise, there was a lot of them. I knew there was something there, but it wasn't until I did some screen cap editing that I got to see what my pursuers looked like. But at the time, I couldn't see where they were, or where I was going. I was literally running blind, and this mob of beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think of was no, as I saw my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken me down to half my total health. When I was saved, the light came back on. Any attackers had disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the lights go out and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in panic mode now, moving as fast as I could go while trying every path I could to find a way out. As I played through this level, the lights went out a total of 3 times. The second time, I would have been dead meat if it had not been for one of these wide-eyed statues. As I stayed close to it, the monsters seemed to all avoid me until the light came back on. The statue warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue, but at the same time, I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it only took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. But before the exit, there was a row of halls leading straight down, with no way out once you entered. You either got to the exit before the monsters reached you, or you died. Thankfully, I made it out. Only one more boss, Godzilla. I started the battle and got something unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back up to 100% again, it seemed to do that randomly, but instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. Godzilla started off fighting like a clone Godzilla, but his disguise burned away after only 3 life bars. Usually a transformation only occurred at the halfway point. At this point, it felt like fighting Godzilla in the normal game. Felt kinda nice to fight one of the original game enemies for a change. Although he wasn't exactly normal, he also had a rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him in the corner and hitting him with eye beams in a spot where he can't hit me, but that was always a cheap trick anyway. But after getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His sprite started to glitch, in much the same way Zora had way back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitches began to form a new shape. And thus, the game had created not Godzilla. And I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game's recreating things. The human face on this one gave it a very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters and had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I got caught in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was also slower than its original counterpart, and it couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by constantly staying out of its line of fire, bombarding the machine with poison powder as I flew over it. One last thing to do, the Hellbeast chase. Oh boy. Might as well get this over with, I thought. The Entropy End chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid it would be, a labyrinth level. All the other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run to the right and not get touched. But this took all the simplicity out of it. There was no telling how big this labyrinth would be or where the exit was. And now not only did I have to constantly backtrack to find my way out, I also had to avoid getting one hit killed by the red monster. And for those first 30 seconds it didn't show up, but I knew it would, and as I started picking up the pace I heard a loud flapping noise. And there it was, in its new flying form. It flew with bat-like wings, and it was as fast and relentless as ever. For reasons already stated, this was probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. And as such, I had to keep my mind focused on the game and not taking screen caps. However, I did take one of the red monster doing something I found very interesting. I had managed to lose it by going through a different path than it apparently expected, and it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth. Or so I thought. It tried clawing through the wall for a second before opening up its mouth and tearing the wall apart with its intestine jaws. But those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back might have been the key to me finding the exit. The path to the exit was long and complex, but from what I remember, I went up and then back towards the left. I'm still not sure why I chose that particular way, just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I hoped that it wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go. Next was the penultimate world called Exodus. And that's the end of Chapter 5, Part 2. In the brief instant before the transition between Entropy and Exodus, I was hoping that I would get Godzilla and Anguirus back. As the board appeared, I saw that my wish was half granted. I had Godzilla back, but no Anguirus. I would have preferred both, but despite Anguirus' neat abilities, I would have chosen Godzilla if I had to pick between the two. Exodus had 2 different colored temples, white and pink. A pyramid, what looked like some modern buildings, and 2 other icons I couldn't figure out at the time. The new bosses were Kumanga, Gorosaurus, and not Ghidorah, whom I was dreading to see, let alone fight. With Godzilla back, I was excited again and eager to explore, yet still cautious. I went to the quiz level first, just as before. This time, Face's questions were more random than ever. Number 1, do elephants breathe? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 2. Number 2, have you ever been molested by a family member? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 6. Number 3, have you ever raped anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 8. Number 4, is green your favorite color? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 10. Number 5, is the computer the pinnacle of modern technology? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 4. Number 6, are you a tough guy? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 12. Number 7, can you fly? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 9. Number 8, can you stand on your head? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face 7. Number 9, do you hate raccoons? Answer, no. Reaction, confused. Number 10, do you feel blame? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face 11. Number 11, answer, yes. Reaction, surprised. Number 12, will you miss me? Answer, yes. Reaction, sad. I was happy that I was getting a new monster, but that last question bothered me. Will you miss me? Is Face referring to when I finished the game? I thought. Since the revelation of the game's truly otherworldly nature, I wasn't sure what to think of Face, or anything else in the game. But something about that last statement made me feel a genuine feeling of sadness from Face. As I was thinking about this, the game had gone back to the board. I had a new monster, but I had no idea who it was supposed to be. The sprite had a slight resemblance to Rodin, but the head was totally off. I moved this mysterious newcomer to a white temple icon and started the level. When I started the level, this screen appeared with the text, "Find the gem," presumably instructions for beating the level. After that, I got my first look at my new playable monster, a hairy, dark blue creature with bat wings and a skull-like face named Solomon. And I found that my path was blocked by a beam of light and a small pillar with a plate on it. I figured that this beam of light was blocking the exit, so I have to find the gem and drop it on the plate to deactivate the beam. How exactly I was going to do that, I didn't know. There wasn't anything in the original game requiring you to find an item to beat a level. I'd have to find out when I obtained the gem. The only direction I had to go was left, so on I proceeded. Solomon was a very interesting monster, to say the least. He was capable of both flight and a heat beam, both of which proved to be very useful. He also could kick and slash things with his wings, but he couldn't duck. The White Temple's music was a vocalizing choir, or a video game approximation as such. It's hard to describe, but it had a very holy sound to it. It wasn't long before I started running into waves of strange new enemies. They did little to stop me. I ran past them while slashing, but didn't take any damage. There was a pause between each wave of enemies. After you had killed about 10, there wouldn't be any for about a minute, and then the next wave would appear. After 5 minutes, I noticed holes in the floor and ceiling. Guillotine-mouthed creatures were rapidly flying up and down these crevices, so I had to time my jumps carefully because I didn't know if I'd get another shot at this. Luckily, I managed to get through there without a scratch. I'm just lucky, I guess. After that, I found myself at the end of the hallway, facing some kind of mini-boss monster. It moved fast and had some kind of projectile that it shot in 4 directions, but I killed it quite easily using Solomon's heat beam. When the battle was over, I had my gem, which was inside the creature's head. I found that I could pick up and hold the gem by walking over to it and holding down B. I made the long trek back to the start, deposited the gem on the plate, and deactivated the beam. I left the stage and was shown what was probably the strangest quirk relating to the Solomon monster. Every time you complete a stage or defeat a boss with Solomon, this screen appears, and it's a picture of Solomon, and it says, "Still the best," in 1973. I have no idea what this means. Neither the date nor the phrase has any meaning or significance to me that I can think of, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. The next level I played was one that I call Bronze Pyramids. I used Godzilla and found that he had leveled up to 12 since I last played as him in Dementia. The Bronze Pyramids were fairly normal as far as these levels go, but the visuals were quite interesting, almost unusually colorful and lively. The music had a fittingly Egyptian style to it. It was slow and mysterious sounding. I strolled through the level, fighting off the various enemies, none of which were too difficult, although the ants could be a pain if you ran into too many at once. My favorite enemy was this giant reptile I encountered halfway through. At the end of the level, I came to a giant pyramid, and I engaged in yet another mini-boss fight. Although this one was a bit different because I had to fight 2 of these monsters at the same time. Individually, I could have dealt with them easily, but fighting both of them at once was challenging. But I sped things up by tricking one of the twin beasts into barbecuing his brother by jumping when he uses his flame breath. After defeating the twin monsters, I noticed something strange after returning to the board. I was now able to move my monster piece anywhere on the board, without limits. Normally, Godzilla could only move 3 spaces each turn, and Mothra could only move 5. I wanted to try out Solomon some more, so I moved his piece over to one of the brown pillar-looking icons with colored dots, and I started the level. When I got to the level, I then realized what the level icon represented: totem poles. I was greeted by 2 of them right at the beginning. The music had a Native American sound to it. It seemed to be using the same instruments as the Entropy Forest. It was noticeably different, but just as foreboding. I walked around for 3 minutes with nothing else in sight besides the totem poles. I didn't realize it until then, but I wasn't expecting another level with nothing alive in it, after all the activity and entropy. Walking by all those multicolored faces, this unnerving level left me feeling like I was being watched. Only about 10 minutes after I started Exodus, I was already halfway through. After getting back from the totem pole level, I tried out one of the TV screens to see how strange things were this time. And this is what appears to be the body of a woman in a bikini and an eagle head, which, same. Even more strange than before, apparently. The music for this was the Uranus theme. I switched back to Godzilla to play another level, and this level was quite a surprise. It was a normal city level. The colors were gloomy, but even still this was quite a shock. This was a kind of level I would expect to see in a Godzilla game, and I was kind of mad I didn't get to play it earlier. The music was the Earth theme. I found it strange that a level fitting a Godzilla game would show up this late, but there's no point crying over spilt milk, I suppose. I moved Solomon over to a grayish screen icon, which turned out to be a giant, high-tech laboratory of some sort. Lots of mechanical drones in this level, but Solomon cleared through them like the White Temple enemies. The music was a gritty, industrial beat. There was also a strange flying cyborg enemy, which was annoying because it would fly away when you jumped to attack it. Also of interest were these large stasis tanks, holding some kind of monster inside. As you would guess, sometimes the monsters awaken and shatter through the glass. I tried to get past the stasis tanks as fast as possible, because the monsters inside proved to be vicious little bastards upon release. At the end of the level was an elevator, which I used to go to the bottom level where the exit was. Along the way, I was shot at by security drones. I couldn't leave the elevator, so my only defense was the heat beam. The last level type was this simple thing that I called the Heart Temple for obvious reasons. Nothing but a big hallway filled with floating enemies shaped like human hearts. They're incapable of causing you damage, so what you do is you run through the level, smashing as many as you can to get all the power-ups. One run through these levels would get the life meter back up to full, and I would greatly appreciate these levels later. The Heart Temple's music reminded me of a circus tune. It had an overly cheerful sound to it, which gave the level a really weird feeling. Having seen all the level types, I chose to fight Gorosaurus using Solomon. The music for this fight was Godzilla's theme. It was during this fight that I realized that Solomon is overpowered. A single well-aimed slash can take down as many as 4 of the enemy's life bars. Due to this, the fight was over very quickly. Gorosaurus had no projectile attacks, or anything else that could match Solomon's deadly claws. But I kept the fight going just long enough to see if Gorosaurus would use his iconic kangaroo kick, and I was greatly pleased when he did. Even though I knew Solomon was my fighting ace, I used Godzilla to battle Kumanga, just for variety. I briefly considered using Mothra, but of course Godzilla won out. Kumanga was also a simple opponent, no heat beams or anything. He attacks by jumping on you, stabbing with his mandibles, and also uses his signature webbing stream to paralyze you. Once you get webbed, Kumanga will sometimes take the opportunity to attack, but it's mostly a way to buy some time, like Godzilla backing you into the corner until the time runs out. His music was Hedorah's theme. With Gorosaurus and Kumanga defeated, I was at the end of Exodus. Before I fought not Ghidorah, there was something I had to do. I wasn't expecting much from it, but for documentation's sake, I took a look at the other TV screen. This is what it was. And this is the body of a businessman in a suit. The head is a faucet dripping water. I don't think there was much reason behind the TV screens. If I were to guess, I'd say it's some random, uncontrolled manifestation of the cartridge's abilities. Or maybe it all makes perfect sense to the game. Who knows? Anyways, Mr. Fawcett's theme was the Saturn music. It was time for the opponent I had been dreading, not Ghidorah. Although I had gained courage with Solomon's combat advantages, I was still nervous. And when I started the fight, I was immediately confused. My opponent was not Ghidorah. I defeated the imposter with a few strikes, and then not Moguera appeared. Then it made sense. In order to get to not Ghidorah, I had to battle all the previous replacements first. And battle them I did. Just lots of screenshots of all the replacements getting their asses kicked. Once I stopped laughing, I destroyed him with only 2 slashes. The music stopped, and I thought I was going back to the board, but the battle wasn't over yet. The real fight was against the Chimera, a monstrous hybrid of all the replacement beasts. This was by far the most difficult boss yet. Every attack of his would cut down whole life bars per use, while attacks against him were greatly weakened. Solomon's Slash, for example, was now lucky to take away 1/2 of a life bar. During this battle, I gained a great appreciation for 2 things: the boss fight time limit and the heart temple. Had it not been for those things, I might have never beaten this boss. To take down this behemoth, I came up with a strategy. I would switch between Godzilla and Solomon. As one began to get dangerously low on health, I would take him through the heart temple, while fighting Chimera with the other. I should count my blessings that Chimera couldn't regain lost health. A very interesting thing about Chimera was that the colored sections on his body corresponded to his different body parts. So each body part effectively had its own life meter. The head was invincible as long as the other parts were present, and would always be the last part to be destroyed. In addition to being difficult, it was also the longest fight so far. I tried to remember how many times I got taken out of the fight by the timer, but I lost count around 13. Eventually, I had destroyed all components but the head, which now flew around on its own at an incredible speed. Chimera fought well, but I was extremely determined, and once he was reduced to a head, he no longer had the power to defeat Solomon, and I heat beamed him into oblivion. And then Chimera was no more. I was exhausted after that drawn-out fight, and worried that might affect my performance in the End-Chase world level. The headquarters icons were replaced, but not by the Hellbeast face. Instead, it was a crucifix. I was completely stunned. I wasn't excited about seeing the Hellbeast icon again, but if there was only one good thing about those levels, it's that they were predictable. I had a basic idea of what to expect. But now, here I was at the end, and the icon was completely different. What did it mean? And why a crucifix? It made me very uneasy. I attempted to start the level with Solomon, but I couldn't. I got this notice that simply stated, "Solomon can't enter here." It didn't say why, but I think maybe it has to do with Solomon's demonic appearance. Since Solomon was out of the question, I went with Godzilla instead. Once I saw the level, the crucifix made sense. The level was a graveyard. I was still on edge, thinking this was some kind of trick. The first level had always involved running from the demonic beast, and I wasn't going to be fooled into thinking that this would be any different. So I started out running, but after a minute without interruption, I slowed down. It was during this time that the music caught my attention. I knew it sounded familiar when I first heard it, but it took a while before I realized what it was. An 8-bit rendition of Prayer for Peace from the first Godzilla film. A very sad, powerful song, even in this form. At 2 minutes into the level, I encountered something that I wasn't sure how to react to. And then the picture is above, it looks like a mausoleum, a feminine blue metallic form with no arms, but it does have legs and the eyes are closed. My first instinct was to run, but this blue, statuesque being simply floated in place, and I felt compelled to just stare at it for a time. Since this was a grave, and it was floating over a chapel, I guessed that it was some kind of angel watching over the deceased. It gave me a strange but warm feeling. I wouldn't say happy, but I felt I was at peace, somehow. I had never seen this being before, yet it seemed very familiar to me. Just as I was going to leave, the Hellbeast appeared, and its presence warped the music into a terrifying, discordant screeching and transformed the level, desecrating the tombstones as a new ground appeared, comprised of blood-soaked bodies. I could feel my heart now beating out of control. I had no chance of escape with the monster that close. It lunged for the kill, but the angel got in the way. The demon roared and started clawing through the angel's legs, and tears of blood streamed from its eyes. I wanted to save the angel, but there was nothing I could do. I had to honor its sacrifice and run. And so I ran through the hellish landscape as fast as I could. The beast soon caught up with me, still swallowing the body of the angel whose legs it had torn off. And this sight made my terror change into anger. I now found myself hating this horrible monster. There was no doubt in my mind that it was pure evil, and I wanted it to die. When I got to the end, I remember how it responded to my insult and trance. I spoke to it and said, "You're going to pay." This was its response. And it looks directly at the camera and opens its horrible little hellmouth. Creepy. I had no idea how I would follow up on that threat, and nothing could have prepared me for the horrors of the final world, Zenith. Alright, which leads us to chapter 7. And you know what? After this, there's chapter 7, 8, and the epilogue, so that's 3 parts. Since we are on an hour in this episode, and I don't really feel like doing another hour of reading, what I'll do is I will split this into a 3rd part. So next week, I will read the last 3 parts of Godzilla NES. Sorry to split this up again, you guys, but I can't read for 2 hours in a row. I will die if I do that. You can already kind of hear it. I need to take a break. All right, so I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Reminder that this podcast is available on YouTube as well as Spotify and other podcast platforms, your Apple Music, what have you. If you could leave a like, comment, a review on whatever platform you're on, it would be greatly helpful, really help to get this podcast rolling. And if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, my email will be linked below, or it's charleymubiz, B-I-Z, @hotmail.com, because we are 80 years old and we still use Hotmail. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next time. Bye!